Hi, this is Becky Spain, your instructor for business communication, and today we will be reviewing Chapter 11 in Excellence in Business Communication. This chapter is entitled Planning Reports and Proposals. It is the first of 4 chapters in Part 4 of our book, which looks at preparing reports and presentations. Now, I know that some of you listening are thinking, oh great, reports and presentations, and you're dreading the thought of actually having to write reports and presentations in your business career. However, there are others in this class that I'm sure are really excited about this, that this is something that you look forward to. Whether you look forward to it or whether you dread it, learning how to make great reports and presentations is really important to your business career. It's going to offer you opportunities to demonstrate your value to your organization in many different situations. So let's start by looking at learning objective number 1, which is applying the 3-step writing process to reports and proposals. I'm sure it's no surprise that we're starting by looking at the 3-step writing process. In previous chapters, we've learned to use the 3-step writing process when developing shorter business messages, and now we're going to apply those same skills to longer business messages in the form of reports and proposals. So typical reports are going to fall into one of 3 basic categories: informational reports, analytical reports, and proposals. So informational reports are going to offer facts and data, feedback, and other types of information without any analysis or recommendations. They're just going to be informational. Where in your analytical report, it's going to offer both information and analysis, and they can also include recommendations. Proposals are going to present persuasive recommendations to internal and or external audiences, and often involve investments or purchases or approvals to do those things. So try to view every business report that you're going to be asked to write as an opportunity to demonstrate your understanding of your audience's challenges and of your ability to contribute to your organization's success. So let's begin by looking at step number 1, analyzing the situation. So just to clarify, this is the first task of step number 1, which is the planning process. Because writing reports and proposals can be much more lengthy. There will be times whenever you're only going to write a page or 2, but there will actually be times when some of the reports that you're called upon could actually number as many as 100 pages. We're breaking this down and looking at each one of the steps per chapter. So for chapter 11, we're going to look at the planning steps, focusing on 2 major areas, which is gathering and organizing information. And then in chapter 12, then we'll actually start looking at the writing steps for proposals and reports. And then chapter 13, of course, we will do completing the reports and proposals. So we're going to begin by looking at analyzing the situation. So many of the reports that you're going to be asked to write, they're going to be fairly complex. And the amount of work involved will put a premium on carefully analyzing the situation and putting a plan in place before you begin to write. So you want to pay special attention to your statement of purpose. Now, your statement of purpose is going to explain why you're preparing the report and what you plan to deliver in the report. So you want to start your statement of purpose with something like to inform, or to analyze, or to persuade, or even to recommend. You want to pin down your general goal in preparing the report. And then in addition to the statement of purpose, you also want to prepare a work plan for most of your reports and your proposals in order to make the best use of your time. For simpler reports, it could be as easy as just an informal list of tasks and a simple schedule. But if you're preparing a lengthy report, especially if it's, like I said, there may be some reports that are 25, 50, or even 100 pages in length, you're going to need a more detailed work plan. And there's a great sample of a work plan in your book on page 324. It's figure 11.2, so take a second and look through that. It'll give you a great idea about what outlining a work plan will look like. So then the next task that you want to do is to start gathering information. So obtaining the information needed for many of your reports is going to require careful planning, and you may even need to do a separate research project just to acquire the data and information you need, and we'll talk more about that shortly. But to stay on schedule and on budget, be sure to review your statement of purpose, and then remember your audience's needs so that you can prioritize your information needs and focus on the most important questions. And next, you're going to select the right combination of media and channels. Now, whenever you are selecting the medium for reports and proposals, remember to consider your audience's needs. Sometimes you won't have a choice in this, and it will have to be delivered in a specific way. It'll also depend upon whether or not the report or the proposal that you are creating is going to be something that your audience is going to have a chance to provide feedback on. If that's the case, you'll want to consider that as well when you're choosing your medium. Sometimes the information that you're providing is going to be a tool for people that are going to have to go back and refer to it frequently or even update it in the future, so you'll want to consider that. And finally, your choice of media also sends a message. For instance, a routine sales report dressed up in expensive multimedia will look like a waste of valuable company resources. So remember that your audience will be judging the appropriateness of your medium choice. Right, then organizing your information. So when your audience will be either receptive or open-minded, you can use the direct approach. It's often used for reports because it's efficient and it's easy to follow. So with the direct reports, you can simply lead with a summary of your key findings, conclusions, your recommendations, your proposal, and then by leading with this information, it's going to save time and makes the rest of your report easier to follow. And for those readers who have questions or want more information, later parts of the report can provide complete findings and supporting details. But as with other types of writing, sometimes the indirect approach is going to be better. You might choose the indirect approach if your audience is unsure about your credibility, or if your audience is not ready yet to accept your main ideas first without finding some reasoning or evidence. Then use the indirect approach because it's going to give you an opportunity to prove your points and to gradually overcome audience reservations. But one thing to keep in mind, though, is that the longer the document is, the less effective that indirect approach is likely to be. All right, so moving on to learning objective number 2. Supporting the message with credible information. Describe an effective process for conducting business research, explain how to evaluate the credibility of information sources, and identify the 5 ways to use research results. So audience expect you to support your message with solid research. As you've probably discovered while doing school projects, effective research sometimes involves a lot more than simply typing a few terms into a search engine. So you can save time and actually get better results by using a clear research process. So the first thing you want to do is plan your research. A solid plan yields better results in less time. You'll know specifically what you're looking for, and it will help you in putting your information together. The second is to locate the data and information that you need. So the research plan tells you what to look for, and your next step is to figure out where to find the information and data that you need. The third step is to process the data and information you've located. So once you do find the information that you need, it's not likely going to be in the form that you need it in. So it's going to require some processing from you. And then once you've processed your data, you're going to have to apply your findings. So you can apply your research findings by summarizing information for somebody else's benefit, or by drawing conclusions based on what you've learned through your research, and then also by developing recommendations. And then the fifth step is to manage your information. So now that you've spent company time and basically company money on getting together all of this research that you spent time putting together, it's important that there be a good record of that so that others in the organization can access the information. So you need to find out within the company that you work for how they share their information. This is often computer-based and is generally known as knowledge management systems. Depending on where you work, you may be required to upload that information so that it's accessible by your peers. At the very least, be sure to share your results with colleagues who may be able to benefit from them. So let's dig a little bit deeper into these 5 steps. Planning your research. We've already talked about the importance of your problem statement, so start by developing a problem statement that will define the purpose of your research, the decision you need to make, or the conclusion you need to reach at the end of the process would be your problem statement. Next, you're going to identify the information you need in order to make that decision or to reach a conclusion, and you can then begin to generate the questions that will constitute your research. In addition, you'll need to prioritize the information needs and concentrate on the most vital questions. Now, as you are planning your research, you want to make sure that you're keeping ethics in mind. It's important to be aware that research carries some significant ethical responsibilities, so to avoid any ethical lapses, you want to keep an open mind so that you don't skew results toward answers you want or expect to find. If you go in with your mind made up, then it's really likely that the research that you find is going to support the thoughts that you already have. But if you can keep your mind neutral and open, then you're going to have better research and you're going to come up with better results. You need to remember to respect the privacy of research participants. Don't ever observe people without their consent, and don't mislead people about the purpose of the questions that you're asking or research that you're doing. You want to make sure that you document all sources and give appropriate credit to any thoughts that are not your own. You want to respect your sources' intellectual property rights. That's the ownership of the unique ideas that have commercial value in the marketplace. Make sure that you don't distort information from your sources and don't misrepresent who you are or how you intend to use any research results. All right, then moving on to the second step of applying the research process, and that's locating data and information. So the range of sources available to business research today is actually huge and remarkable. Sometimes actually it can be overwhelming. If you have questions about an industry, a company, a market, a new technology, a financial topic, chances are good that somebody else has already researched that topic. So even in your own company, you might find that some people have already looked into the problem. So research material previously created by another purpose is known as secondary research. So secondary sources include things like magazines, newspapers, public websites, books, reports. Don't let the name fool you. Start with secondary research because it can save considerable time and money for many projects. So in contrast, primary research is research done specifically for your current project. Primary sources usually include surveys, interviews, observations, experiments, focus groups. Primary research is much more time-consuming and can be more costly because, of course, you're having to create the research and then interpret that rather than using secondary research where the research has already been done and they're simply reporting on it. So for most business reports, secondary research will be your primary use, but there will be times when you will have to look at primary research for your efforts. So as you're looking at secondary research sources, you have the responsibility to verify the quality of any source that you choose to use. So ask yourself questions about the source of information that you're accessing. Does the source have a reputation for honesty and reliability? Is the source potentially biased? What was the purpose of the source? What was the purpose of the material that you used as a source? Who was the author? Is he credible? Where did the source get its information? Can you verify the information independently? Is the material current and complete? Do the source's claims stand up to scrutiny? Step back and determine whether the information makes sense and whether it's meeting this list of criteria. And then using research results. After you've collected all the necessary information, the next step is to transform it into the specific content that you need for your report. So for simple projects, you may be able to just drop your material directly into your report or to your presentation. However, if you've gathered a significant amount of information or raw data from surveys, you may need to process the material before you can use it. So this step can involve analyzing numeric data, quoting, paraphrasing or summarizing material, drawing conclusions, and making recommendations. So once you've collected your information, whether it's primary or secondary, chances are it'll be secondary, the next step is transforming it into specific content that you need. So this step involves paraphrasing, quoting, and summarizing materials, and sometimes even analyzing numerical data. So let's take just a second and go over some of these terms. So quoting a source means that you reproduce it exactly as you found it. And though it's important to put quotation marks around and set apart anything that you use directly from the material that you found, it's also important to remember that too much quoting creates a choppy patchwork and gives the impression that all you've done is piece together work from other people. So though quoting directly may be important and may be useful to you, make sure that you keep that to a minimum so that it doesn't look like all that you're doing is copying and putting somebody else's work in your document. So that's where paraphrasing can be very helpful. You can maximize the impact of secondary material in your own writing by just simply paraphrasing it, which means to restate it in your own words. So paraphrasing helps you to maintain a consistent tone and present information using vocabulary that might be more familiar to your audience. It'll help you to avoid that choppy feeling of too many quotations. However, I need to remind you that you still need to credit the originator of the information even though you didn't use a direct quotation, because the information that you're providing was not your original thoughts or research. It's very similar to, or actually it should parallel any academic writing that you've been doing in college. And then finally, summarizing is similar to paraphrasing, but presents the gist of the material in fewer words than the original. So an effective summary identifies the main ideas and major support points from your source, but leaves out most details. It also might leave out examples or other information that is less critical to your audience. Once again, make sure that you give credit to the source that you've used. So all three of these approaches require careful attention to ethics. When quoting directly, take care not to distort the original intent of the material by quoting selectively or out of context, and never succumb to plagiarism, presenting someone else's words as your own. Make sure that you always, always, always provide proper credit. All right. So to help illustrate what we've been talking about in your book on page 332, there is a figure that helps you to look at how to summarize effectively. Take a minute or two and walk through that information. It will be helpful to you to visualize what we've been talking about verbally here. Drawing conclusions and making recommendations. So after all of your planning, your research, and your processing, you're finally ready to apply your findings. So depending on your writing project, you may be drawing conclusions based on your results or making recommendations. So a conclusion is a logical interpretation of facts in your report. So reaching good conclusions based on the evidence is one of the hallmarks of innovative business leaders. Whereas a conclusion interprets the facts, a recommendation differs as it suggests what to do about the facts. So to be credible, recommendations must be practical and based on sound, logical analysis. And then, of course, if you're making a recommendation, you need to logically move forward by also telling your readers or your audience what happens next. Okay, learning objective number 3. Conducting secondary research. Explain the role of secondary research and describe the 2 major categories of online research tools. So even if you intend to conduct some primary research, you would start any project by a review of any available secondary research. So inside your company, you might be able to find a variety of reports or other documents that could help you. But outside the company, there's also research that most likely would be available to you through a wide range of print or online resources, both in libraries and online. So let's look first at finding information in a library. So there are a couple of different sources of libraries. There's the public library in your own community as well as university libraries, and both of these offer an enormous array of research tools. So many of these also have search engines that are available to you only through a membership with that library. And then finally, there's also reference librarians, and they can be very helpful to you, helping you direct you to the library's resources or even helping you to understand how to use their web searches. Though libraries are going to have physical copies of periodicals and newspapers, business books, almanacs, and statistical resources and government publications, they're also going to have electronic databases available. Many of those will also have within them these exact same items that I've just mentioned, in addition to a variety of sources that are not available any other way except through an electronic database. Another great plus for electronic databases is that usually once that you are online and know how to use that and you've got a membership with that library, you can access those databases online from any computer, and that's great because then you're not having to make trips to the library for your research. So let's look a little bit closer at finding information online. So the internet can be a great, tremendous source of business information as well, provided that you know where to look and how to use the tools available. So roughly speaking, the tools fall into 2 categories. First, those that you can use to actively search for existing information, and then those that you can use to monitor selected sources for new information. And some tools can perform both functions. So the most familiar search tools are general purpose search engines that you're familiar with, I'm sure, like Google and Bing. They scan millions of websites to identify individual web pages that contain specific words or phrases and then attempt to rank the results from the most useful to the least useful. For all their ease and power, conventional search engines have some shortcomings. First of all, there's no human editor to evaluate quality of the search results. Various engines use different search techniques, so they often find different materials, and then search engines can't reach all the content on some websites because some are hidden internet or deep internet or require memberships to get to that information. And one other point that I'll just make here as well is you need to make sure that anything that you're using as a source that you found online through some of these general search engines, you need to make sure of the credibility of the source, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more in a minute, but I did want to mention that at this point in this presentation. So to overcome some of the weaknesses that I just talked about in the general purpose search engines, you can use tools like the web directories, like meta crawlers or meta search engines or online databases. Now, web directories are great because they address the first shortcoming that I just mentioned, because they have human editors that categorize and evaluate the websites. Meta search engines address the second shortcoming I just mentioned by formatting your search results for multiple search engines and then telling you how many hits each engine was able to find. And then finally, for your online databases, it addresses the third shortcoming of search engines by offering access to newspapers and magazines and journals that you're likely to need for many research projects. So let's look at online monitoring tools. One of the most powerful aspects of online research is the ability to automatically monitor selected sources for new information. So the possibilities include subscribing to news feeds. I'm getting ahead of myself in my thoughts here. News feeds from blogs and websites, and then of course following people on Twitter or other microblogs. You can set up online alerts on search engines and on databases, and use specialized monitors such as TweetBeep to track tweets that mention specific companies or other terms. So these are really great tools to keep you current with new things that are happening in whatever area that you're researching. Right, let's look at some search tips. So search engines, web directories, databases, they all work in different ways. So you need to make sure that you understand how to optimize your search and interpret the results for each tool that you choose to use. So the most basic form of searching, of course, is just a keyword search, in which the engine or database attempts to find items that include all of the words that you've entered. I'm sure that you're incredibly familiar with that. We've all done that 1,000 times. Boolean search expands on this capability by using search operators that let you define a query with better precision. So they allow you to limit your research or increase your research by saying this and this, or this or this, or you can even do exclusions by saying not this and include specific words or terms that you don't want anything that you're pulling up to include. There's also natural language searches, which let you ask questions in normal everyday English. And then recently search engines such as Google and Yahoo have implemented forms-based searches that help you create powerful queries without the need to learn any special techniques. Just a few really quick tips to make the best use of any search engine or database. Think before you search. After you've identified what you need to know, spend a few minutes thinking about what the information spend a few moments thinking about where that information might be found, how it might be structured, and what terms various websites might use to describe it. Make sure that you read and pay attention to the details. A few minutes of learning can save you hours of insufficient search time and lots of frustration. Review the search and display options carefully so that you don't misinterpret the results. Try variations of your terms or use fewer search terms. And finally, look beyond the first page of results. Don't assume that the highest ranking results are the best sources for you and what your needs are for your report. For example, materials that haven't been optimized for search engines won't rank as highly, meaning they're not going to show up in that first page or two of results, but they may be far better for your specific purpose. And then moving on to learning objective number 4, conducting primary research. So the role of primary research, we're going to look at that, as well as identifying the 2 most common forms of primary research for business communication purposes. So if secondary research can't provide the information and insights you need, your next choice is to gather the information yourself with primary research. So there also might be times whenever your company is going to ask you to supplement or to do primary research. And so these are some good points to know, depending on whether or not you need to delve into that area for a report, or if that's something in particular that your company is asking you to do. So primary research encompasses a variety of methods. It can be observations or experiments, such as test marketing, but the two most commonly used ones for business research are surveys and interviews. And I'm sure that you have been surveyed by businesses gathering information in the past, and that is one example of primary research that business is conducting. So when you conduct a survey, it can provide invaluable insight, but only if they are reliable and if they are valid. So to develop effective survey questionnaires, here's a few tips. But one that I will tell you is that it's really great if you can work with someone within your organization who has expertise in this area, and they can review or help you to structure your questions, because your information is only going to be as good as the questions that you create and the way that you've written them. So you want to make sure that you're not writing things in such a way that it leads the people who are filling out the questionnaire to a certain answer. You really want them to have good information and give you non-biased responses. You need to make sure that your questions are structured in such a way as to encourage that. So you want to first start by providing clear instructions. Your respondents, or the people who are filling out your survey, need to know exactly how to fill it out. Don't ask for information that people can't be expected to remember. For instance, a question on like, how many times did you go grocery shopping last year? Well, who knows? So don't ask questions that they're just going to have to guess at, because it's not going to give you reliable information. Keep the questionnaire short and easy to answer. Don't make any individual questions difficult to answer, and don't expect people to give you more than 10 or 15 minutes of their time tops. Really, the best questionnaires are 5 to 7 questions and can be quickly responded to. After too much time, people's minds wander, or they just quit answering the questions for you. When possible, create your questionnaire so that the questions you're asking people to answer can be easily analyzed. So numbers are easy to summarize. Facts and opinions sometimes are a little bit harder. So following up on the thought of well-written questions, you don't want to ask a leading question that might say something like, do you prefer that we stay open in the evenings for customer convenience? Well, you know, you're kind of leading the answer to that. Who wouldn't say, yes, of course, I'd love for you to be open longer hours. Instead, you might ask, what time of day do you normally go shopping? You want to avoid ambiguous questions like often or frequently, because they mean different things to different people. As in all good business writing, avoid compound questions, such as, do you read books and magazines? Because you might read one and not the other. So how do you answer that question? When selecting people to participate in a survey, the most critical task is getting a representative sample of the entire population in question. So a good handbook on survey research will help you select the right people for your survey, including selecting people, enough people to have a statistically valid survey. In your book on page 338, there is a figure that lists types of survey questions. Take a couple of minutes and look through these examples. And always remember, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't write good questions that are actually going to give you valid information, then you're going to get garbage. And that's what's going to be in your report. And you certainly don't want to have a report that's written on faulty data. So, conducting interviews. So like surveys, interviews require careful planning to get the best results, and the types of questions you ask and the way that you ask them are going to influence the answers that you get. So an open-ended question invites a person to actually offer their opinion and their insights and their information, such as, why do you believe that South America represents a better opportunity than Europe for this product line? That's an open-ended question, where a closed-ended question just elicits an answer that's yes or no. If you could gather the information through yes or no questions, then of course your survey is your better tool. So if you're doing an interview, make sure that you're utilizing your resource by asking as many of your questions as open-ended as possible. Also, think carefully about question sequence and the potential answers so that you can arrange them in an order that helps uncover layers of information. You might also want to provide the people that you're interviewing with a list of questions prior to the interview so that they have time to think about their answers. And if you want to record interviews, you need to ask ahead of time and never record without permission. Learning objective number 5, planning informational reports. Explain how to plan informational reports and website content. So informational reports provide the feedback that employees, managers, and others need in order to make decisions, take action, and respond to changes. Informational reports can be one of 4 different categories: reports to monitor and control operations, or reports to implement policies and procedures. There are reports to demonstrate compliance, and then there are reports to document progress. When looking at how to organize informational reports, most reports use a topical organization, arranging material by either comparison, sequence, importance, chronologically, geographically, or by category. And as always, we have to be conscientious of the fact that if we are organizing for website content, that there's some special things that we need to do. We need to remember that the web readers can be very demanding. Most visitors won't bother to dig for information. They scan navigation buttons and headings and hyperlinks looking for possibilities. And if nothing looks promising, then they're gone. So remember that whenever you're creating content, remember that reading online can be difficult. Most people reading on a computer monitor, it's more difficult than reading from the printed page. The web is a nonlinear, multi-dimensional medium, so readers of online material move around in lots of different order, whatever order that suits them, rather than like linearly. So there's often no beginning, no middle, and no end, and you need to keep that in mind as you write as well. Learning objective number 6, identify the 3 most common ways to organize analytical reports. So the purpose of analytical reports is, of course, to analyze, to understand, or to explain. So in other words, to think about a problem or an opportunity, explain how it will affect the organization, and then recommend how the organization should respond. So in many cases, you'll be expected to make a recommendation based on your analysis. So the typical analytical report falls into 3 basic categories: either reports to assess opportunities, or a report to solve a problem, or a report to support a decision. Writing analytical reports presents a greater challenge than writing informational reports because you are doing more than simply delivering information. You are also analyzing a situation and then presenting your conclusions. When your analysis is complete, you need to present your thinking in a compelling and persuasive manner, and analytical reports often convince people to make significant financial or even personal decisions, and these reports carry the added responsibility of the consequences of such decisions. So when writing for the audiences that are likely to accept your conclusions, either because they have asked you to perform an analysis and they trust your judgment, consider using the direct approach by focusing immediately on your conclusions. So this structure communicates the main idea quickly, but it does not come without some risks. Even if the audience trusts your judgment, they may have questions about your methods or the data that you used, and starting with a conclusion may create the impression that you have oversimplified the situation. So to give readers the opportunity to explore the thinking behind your conclusion, support the conclusion with solid reasoning and evidence. When structuring a report around recommendations, use the direct approach. Then unfold your recommendations using a series of steps, including establish the need for action in the introduction, generally by briefly describing the problem or the opportunity. Then next, introduce the benefit that can be achieved along with any potential risks. Third, you're going to list the steps or the recommendations that are required to achieve the benefit, and you're going to use action verbs for emphasis. The 4th step is to explain each step fully, giving details on procedures, the costs, and of course the benefits. And then finally you'll end by summarizing your recommendations. So when readers are potentially skeptical or hostile, consider using the indirect approach to build logically towards your conclusions or your recommendations. And if you guide readers along a rational path toward the answer, they're more likely to accept it when they encounter it. So the most common logical approach is the 2 + 2 = 4 approach, or the yardstick approach. Now the 2 + 2 approach is where you convince readers by demonstrating that everything adds up to your conclusion. And the yardstick approach, you use numbers. You use a number of criteria to decide which option to select from 2 or more possibilities. So you're measuring against a yardstick there. And then finally, learning objective number 7, how to plan proposals. So proposals can be grouped into 2 different categories. There's internal proposals and external proposals. Internal proposals request decisions from managers within the organization, while an external proposal would request decisions from parties outside of the organization. So for example, investment proposals request funding from outside investors. Grant proposals request funds from government agencies or other sponsoring organizations. And sales proposals present solutions for potential customers and request purchase decisions. The most significant factor in planning a proposal is whether the recipient has asked you to submit the proposal. So if it was asked for, it's a solicited proposal. And if it was not asked for, it was an unsolicited proposal. So normally with a solicited proposal, your proposal is expected, and it usually comes with strict instructions for what to do. An unsolicited proposal is unexpected, so it does provide you with some more flexibility about what you want to include. And though you might have more flexibility, there's a different sort of challenge because whoever you're writing it to isn't necessarily expecting to receive it. And the audience may actually be unaware of the problem or the opportunity that you're addressing. So before you can propose a solution, you might first need to convince your audience that a problem or an opportunity actually exists. So because of that, the indirect approach is often the best choice for an unsolicited proposal. So regardless of the format and the structure, a good proposal explains what a project or course of action will involve, how much it'll cost, and how the recipient or the organization will benefit. All right, so that concludes planning the report or proposal process. We will pick up with Chapter 12 when we look at Step 2, which is the writing reports and proposal phase. I'll see you for Chapter 12.